just found yourself 60 miles from anywhere. Today I'm going to talk about traction and imposter syndrome. It's another writing post. Right now it's snowy, the roads suck. Today I went to drive and get groceries, and it was pretty much driving through the ruts the trucks left behind. That's not fun. So today I'm going to talk about something that's a lot safer than being out in the winter roads up in the mountains, out in the middle of nowhere. And that's writing. I do a lot of that in the wintertime. So, if you like this episode, please check out my website, 60milesfromanywhere.com. And there you're going to find more stories on my blog, as well as insights about creative writing, travel stories, and all sorts of other goodies. My fiction is available at amazon.com, and you can find the link at my website. My book was called Song of the Cinder, and I wrote it, 10 years ago, and it's been published for just a little over 8. It's available in both trade paperback and ebook for Kindle. It makes a great gift for that lover of fantasy, alternate history, and horror in your life. Your donation to support this podcast and my website are always appreciated. You can click on the Buy Me a Coffee link on my website. Be sure to leave a rating or a comment on the platform to which you're subscribed. Ratings and comments help improve my rankings on platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and many others. I'm also an affiliate with Origin USA. They're an American company that makes boots, jeans, and martial arts gear. And they also sell dietary supplements and weight gainer and all sorts of other goodies. So click on the link on my website and you can use code Harris10 for 10% off your purchase there. All content is written, recorded, and produced by me, Clinton A. Harris. If you're interested in working with me for podcasting, writing, voice work, or other projects, please contact me via the links on my website, 60milesfromanywhere.com. Let's get started. Sometimes you just feel like a phony. Work is supposed to be for other people. It's supposed to be an empty practice of non-attachment in exchange for money that keeps you alive long enough to come back and do it all over again. Obligations to others, debts, responsibility. Mostly stuff you're compelled to accumulate around you to be more like everybody else. Those occasional moments that burn off and you look at yourself and say, I'm doing exactly what I've always tried to do. It feels great. It feels strange to settle into it, too. One time I sat in a vintage Bentley touring car. This was in high school. They used to have this race called the Colorado Grand, and they would bring cars, these old vintage cars, and they would park them out on the lawn of the courthouse. And a bunch of us would ditch school to go look at these neat old cars. My friend Tony and I sat in this old Bentley. I think it was a 23 Bentley. My head barely peeked up over the dash. The seats were slung low, and that giant steering wheel rubbed against the top of my legs. It was made of this burled and polished wood. It was difficult to let myself just sit back and relax, and what I discovered was a $100,000 vehicle. Coming to the realization that I'm a writer is a lot like that. Like, don't get too comfortable with this. It can't possibly last. Eventually, they're going to find out that you're full of shit, and you'll be run out of town on a rail, tarred and feathered, with angry villagers chasing behind you with torches and pitchforks chanting, "Fake, fake, fake." I get to sit down and dredge old memories out and some events that never happened and mix them together to create stories that hopefully my readers can see themselves in. That's all part of the craft. For money, I basically write 1,000-word essays about a wide variety of subjects. Back in high school and college, I remember telling people once school was over, I was never going to write another essay again, yet here I am. I do research on a subject and I write what I've learned to meet the requirements the client needed to distribute the information. I get paid to do this. When the client remembers to pay me, that is, or when somebody else doesn't write something better. I'm pretty good at it, though, so unless the client is flaky, that usually doesn't happen very much. The creative process is often difficult because you realize that just working on a project indefinitely isn't enough. At some point, you're going to have to finish it and release it into the wild. You feel a little overprotective of it, like sending a kid out to walk to school by themselves for the first time. That kind of apprehension can sit in the pit of your stomach and just make you sick. I sent a first draft of my book out to a few people who said they wanted to read it. And I'll be honest and say I'm actually relieved that either they haven't yet, or they haven't had the heart to write me back and say that it's a steaming pile of crap. The subsequent drafts of the book have been necessary, let's just say that. Lately I've been on a roll, editing the second draft. Just the other day I took 10 little scenes that were all about the same time and began combining them into a larger, cohesive chapter. Sometimes it takes an entire rewrite to incorporate all these little moments into something bigger and better. I usually know when I'm onto something when I do a rewrite, and then later on I find another section of notes which has nearly identical words used to describe the scene. It just needed to work right. The other day I was working on a new chapter because the editing and cutting and fusing scenes together had revealed some empty spots earlier in the story, and they all needed to be included. Right now, my policy on chapters has been that I will write a scene like this only if it resonates with the later chapter or is a parallel to something that happens later to another character. It's a weird kind of binary method, which I hope is mimetic of the whole quantum entanglement thing I'm trying to put into the story. My high school English teacher gave me a piece of advice when writing outlines that I've used ever since. You can't have an A without a B. Unless the scene is echoed someplace else or has a callback, it's not really all that crucial to the story, so it gets cut. Lots of weaker elements are getting cut too, because as I read through, I think, who the hell cares? Or it might be something that needs to be unpacked and included in a different story altogether. I removed an entire character because I realized they were just too big for the story, and it detracted from what I was trying to say. They might wind up in another book, they might not. They might wind up in a short story. Either way, the stuff was just too good to just dispose of. Writing is a lot like when they used to hunt the buffalo. Use the whole thing. Use everything. The bones, the gristle, everything. What sometimes confuses me is when I realize that not only do some people listen to these episodes, but they actually like the content. I've been losing traction with the podcast lately because I have my doubts that sometimes I can speak to the subject matter with enough authority to give it any value. I have a whole episode on my theory of procrastination already written, but I have been putting off recording it. How fitting. Mostly I'm afraid some of my more educated listeners will say, well, that's not what procrastination is at all. So fear is an element. There's also that sting of when I sit down to record something, I know I'm going to flub up some things. I'm going to be a perfectionist. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to re-record what I said. I might have mispronounced something. I might have slurred my words together. It wouldn't have been perfect. And tonight, I'm just going to kind of work on saying it as it comes to my mind. Reading a little bit off the script, but not beating myself up, because it stresses me out so much when I think I have to do all these things perfectly. I just don't even want to do it. It kind of takes the fun out of it, and I'm not being graded on this podcast. The grade that I get is if you listen to it and you enjoy it, and I hear about it later, that makes me happy. That's about it. A couple of years ago, I tried to do the podcasting thing. It was called Gasoline Shower Thoughts, and I thought that was a catchy title, and I thought it would blow up, and it didn't. I think I produced maybe 5 episodes. My son and I did an episode together, and he explained what he knew about a fairy tale that he knew, and he had it completely twisted around. And I think maybe that's what I've been doing too. Like, who am I to talk about anything? I actually got people messaging me saying, well, it was cool that he was saying this stuff, but did you know that he didn't have it right? And it's like, yeah, I know he had it completely wrong. But the fact that he stood up on a mic and he said what he thought it meant, I think that was something. And maybe that's what I have to do with myself, is be a little bit more forgiving. And maybe that's what people need to do with any kind of creative process. We're not masters at it. Nobody is. The people that are just very well practiced, and they have a lot of second chances to get it right. So, imposter syndrome really takes hold, and you lose even more traction to do the work. Who am I to do this? I'm not perfect. I'm not, the top 10 podcasters. I'm not these YouTube personalities. The truth is that there's no absolute formula for writing or creative process or anything other than at some point you have to string words together and tell a story. You have to do the work. You have to keep your butt in the chair long enough to do it. You can use fancy words. Some words can be more conventional in tone. You can take 100 writers and ask them what their process is, and you're going to get 102 ways to do it. Same thing goes for sculptures, painting, macrame, knitting, just about anything. People listen to the likes of Stephen King when he talks about writing, or their MFA profs, or somebody who won an award because they think they cracked the code. They haven't. There is no code. A lot of it is just luck. A lot of it is being blessed with the receiver of your brain that pulls stories out of the ozone, and you use your fingers to type them down, or use a pen or a pencil on a pad of paper, the old school way. I know some people, they do their first and second draft on like a Big Chief tablet with a pencil. It's amazing. It's not how I work. I usually type, 30,000 words and boil it down to 8. There's a lot of stuff that I cut. There's a lot of stuff that I realized was just me kind of fooling around, and that's fun. That's part of why I like doing it, is you get to play with words. Now, publication is not a litmus test for good writing either. Publication is a validation of saying what somebody wanted to hear at that given moment, and that person just happened to have their checkbook handy. There's a lot of crap out there. The best novel ever written is probably sitting in somebody's desk or hard drive, so I've been told. At the end of the day, after writing content for websites or scripting a podcast, or lately attempting to make headway with the book, I just don't have it in me sometimes to sit down and record these shows. The recording process is tricky. I have to sit down. I have to get all my stuff together. I have to remember to breathe. That's a tricky one. Like even right now, I can feel myself needing to take a breath. Dead air is basically the death of any kind of recording. We're used to polished voices on the radio. We're used to podcasts where people can improvise and fill in things and everything else. But I'll be honest with you. I'm sitting here drinking my cup of coffee, and then I get self-conscious about that because I just took a drink of coffee. And now I've got these wet mouth sounds that you're probably not going to be able to unhear. So sometimes when I'm doing these recordings, I'm so conscious of these mouth sounds, and I'm so conscious of the fact that I'm breathing or taking a breath, that once in a while, I actually get lightheaded. I have to sit there and breathe. And I usually stop the recording, and I just breathe. Why am I telling you that right now? Because I'm showing you that behind the scenes, nothing is perfect. For example, I realize that I can't record early on in the day because I just have too much traffic. Sometimes I have a visitor that comes by. My mom will knock on the door. The dog will freak out. Sometimes I have a friend call. Sometimes I get texts. There's sounds outside. There's traffic. There's the neighbor bumping around. There's all sorts of stuff. Sometimes it just isn't optimal, so I record at night. That's when it's more peaceful. That's when it's quiet. That's when the sounds of the heater aren't going to be too loud. I'm not gulping for air. Here's a funny thing that you should know too about when you record these things. Gas. So it's kind of funny that a couple of times that I recorded, I realized that if I ate too soon before I started recording, I would burp, because when I try to do these recordings, I gulp air. And if you've got a full stomach, you're going to burp a lot. So I would find myself scrambling for the stop button so I could just burp and get it out of my system. And sometimes early in the morning, like my sinuses are still kind of full, so I find that I'm really nasal sounding. So I usually record at nighttime when there's less noise, fewer distractions, my stomach is empty, the dog isn't losing her mind at the sound of a car driving too close by, or she's not coming up and begging for treats. She's not pestering me to throw her squirrel for the 9 millionth time or taking her outside to go see the deer. Thinking what I say isn't all that important, and it's a lot just like talking to myself, which can also drive you nuts too. My numbers kept dropping. That was another reason that I was losing traction with the recording. What's my motivation to keep recording this? I'm intrinsically motivated to work on the book because it demands my attention and needs to be finished. It's like a physical pain when I can't work on the book for long periods of time. It has a finite amount of time it needs to be written into, either before the end of my life or when I get sick of working on it and decide to release it into the wild so I can finally work on something else that's been tugging at my shirt tails. This podcast has no such deadline. I can do it whenever I want, but the idea is to create a platform of listeners, and by the time I'm ready to publish the book, either traditionally or self-publish, I'll already have a bunch of people that I can call fans who might actually buy the sucker, or better yet, read it. Poverty is also a distraction. I'm out of money and I need to make more to pay bills and obligations and other tedious adult type shit. The weeks just seem to have slipped past, and only now is the end of the year slump ending. And that's when I'm going to start getting new work. I've gotten a couple of assignments over the last week. I think 6 or 7. Well, that's more than a couple. That's several. But they're exhausting. I can sit and work on those all day. The other day I had a 6,000 word day with assignments, and it was all very dry stuff. It was writing for attorneys. It was writing for dentists. I just hope that they sell, because I've got bills to pay. I have to eat. And that's just one of the obligations of being a freelancer. Is it's a job. It's also a career for some people. I've mentioned that in another podcast too, but it is a job. And a job is a lot different from a passion. The job was like when you have to sit down and do it. And it's not necessarily something that you want to work on, but you have to, because sometimes you need money to live. Gas, not the burping or farting kind of gas, but gasoline that you put in your car so you can drive out of town to get groceries. Anyway, the weeks just seem to have slipped past. And only now, the end of the year slump is finally coming to an end, I hope. So I started reading a book the other day. It's called Bird by Bird. It's by Anne Lamott. And she's written several books. And it's a lot of good stuff in this book. I definitely need to read more. I think I produce more than I actually take in a lot of the time. A lot of the things that I do write about are observational life experiences, but it does help when you can read something that somebody else has written. You get an idea for cadence and flow, words put together. You kind of switch in your editor brain too, and it's just like, oh, would I have said that like that? That didn't make exactly a lot of sense. And it's kind of cool to see that too with somebody that's actually widely published. And I saw a TED Talk that she gave the other day that was really interesting. She gave all these tips for life, and I thought it was really cool. So if you get a chance, get on YouTube and look up Anne Lamott, Lamott. And she wrote a book called Bird by Bird. And the reason that she wrote it was because she had a 10-year-old brother at the time who was trying to do a report on birds. He'd procrastinated. And he had all these unopened books sitting around him. He was crying, and his dad, her dad too, a writer, came up and he said, "You'll get this done. You just have to take it bird by bird." And that's been kind of cool. I've taken that to heart because the traction that I've been losing with the podcasting, with writing in general, and even with the paid writing, I just need to take it bird by bird. And that's important because I just want to get everything done at once, and it's not going to happen. I mean, you can only go in one direction, one straight line, and it's one word at a time. I guess it's one bird at a time. And the book has been helping. It's a lot of insights. It's good stuff. So I wanted to talk about how writing is this mixture of telling truths and couching them with lies. My poetry professor in college, I've got a funny story about him that I'll tell because, hey, if you've made it this far, you might be interested in hearing about this. But his name was Jim Doyle. And a bunch of us showed up in poetry class, and they were classes that were 7 o'clock at night to 10 o'clock at night, once a week on a Wednesday night. And the whole class showed up for this creative writing poetry class. And we were all noisy, and the time was ticking away. It was a little bit after 7. We were like, when in the heck is the professor going to show up? Well, this guy comes in. It's an older gentleman, comes in. He's holding a Diet Pepsi. He's wearing sandals, I think, and like sweatpants. Bald, gray hair, a mixture of the two. He walks in, and somebody actually says, excuse me, sir, this is a class right now. Because he kind of looked like the janitor. He had no teeth on the top of his mouth. And he sets down his pop and he starts scribbling on the board his name. And he says, yeah, I know, I'm your professor. And everybody just shut up. We did not expect a man that looked like this to be our poetry professor. I mean, he looked like a truck driver. But the cool thing, really cool, is he finally got us all to shut up. And he had us all say our names one by one. He went down through the rows of chairs, and there was 20, 25 people in this room. And he says, by the end of the night, I'm going to remember your names. And he went down through the list. And each person stood up, said their name, sat back down. And he did this twice. And at the end of that class, he knew everybody's names. And he broke us up into 4 different groups, and we met one day per month. So it was like these 4 class groups each met for like one Wednesday a month. And he gave us all these really kind of tough assignments. We had to write villanelles, we had to write sestinas, we had to write all these different poems. And the way that he had us learn poetry was that we had poetry that was assigned to us. And he would read sections of the poems back, and we had to remember key words in that poem as like a fill in the blank. So that was our test every time that we came in for class. And then we had our own poetry we had to write. It was a great class, and we each had, I'd say, 5 or 6 students per section. So we got to be pretty close too. And I was friends with a few of these people for years and years after that class ended. But here's the funny part about that story. After I graduated in 1998, I went to Barnes & Noble, and I got a job there. It was kind of like a weird, I've always wanted to do this kind of job. I started working at the bookstore the next town over in Fort Collins. And one day, I'm at the cash wrap, and Jim Doyle, my professor, comes in. And I'm like, Jim, how's it going? Because it was back in the 90s, and that was when professors were starting to have people call him by their first name. And I said, Jim, how are you doing? And he looks at me, and he says, Clint, how are you doing? And it was just amazing because I hadn't seen this man in, 3 years at that point, 2 or 3 years, and he still remembered my name. And I just thought that was really killer. He asked me about work that I was doing, writing, all that kind of stuff. I told him I was working on a book, and he said, how long does it take you to write a book? And I told him, well, I've been working on this one for about 2 years. And he said, that sounds about right. So he and his wife were kind of like a tag team couple that they wrote poetry together. She was kind of like his live-in editor, which must have been nice. It must have been really awesome to just kind of pitch that stuff past her. And I don't know, as far as I know, I do a Google search once in a while, and the man is still alive. I don't know if he's still writing poetry or not. I think he's in his 80s by now. But I don't know. I just kind of wanted to share that story. So the reason he came up is he was the guy that said writing is lying. But writing is also telling ultimate truths. And one of the best examples of that is I used to write a lot of genre fiction, especially short stories. Science fiction and fantasy, they were what I cut my teeth on. They're probably the purest distillation of the truth because the important bits are isolated and separated from everything else in their purest form and encapsulated in a narrative within a totally controlled environment. So the epic quest limits the world to black and white thinking. Magic solves pretty much all the other problems and the health problems and everything else. You have absolutes like good versus evil, fellowship, betrayal. And science fiction is like a sterile petri dish of social issues. You take an idea like racism or social constructs, and you break them down to their atomic level, and you mix in just enough humanity to make the story interesting and relatable. Otherwise, we would wonder how we got such things like lifelike robots that are indistinguishable from people, or why aliens all speak English and wouldn't have anything to do with the uplifted primates who struggle between the fields of divinity and the curse of intellect in the first place. Humankind sounds like that girl at the bar everybody knows is nothing but drama, but idiots keep taking her home anyway. And anyway, that's kind of what science fiction talks about humanity. And sometimes when I write, like now, I'm exhausted. But once my fingers start going, I have to see it through. Otherwise, tomorrow I might wake up, open up my laptop, look at a big mess and think it's going to be a lot of work I don't have time for, and give up. Coffee usually starts my day off, along with scrolling social media, getting dopamine hits from TikTok and Instagram, checking my emails for any bad news that'll probably wreck my whole fucking day. By the time I have my chores around the house done, a couple hours of fetch with Penny played, I cook meals for myself, I avoid contact with people so my creative resources aren't depleted. I usually have the choice of sitting down to work on the book or the podcast, or fulfilling my obligations with making enough money to live on. On any given day, I've usually only got about 2,000 to 4,000 words in me. The other day was 6K. That counted paid posts, this script that I'm reading right now, and a new chapter that I just started after I was done writing the script. At the end of the night, I might wind down with some TV or collapse in my bed. I actually love to watch hockey. For me, I don't even really have a particular team. I mean, I'm an Avs fan, but for me, NHL hockey is a lot like watching the Ice Capades. You have some amazing professionals, and they don't skate like they want to get hurt, not like they do in the semi-pro level. Those guys fist fight. Those guys beat the hell out of each other. And National Hockey League hockey, it's a lot of big guys just kind of drifting around on the ice and passing the puck. And though the Avs are my team because I'm a Colorado native, I will watch just about any hockey game that's on just because it's so relaxing. For me, watching a hockey game is like some people that have an aquarium and they just watch the fish swim around. And for me, a hockey game is a lot like watching fish. So anyway, the whole damn thing starts all over again when I wake up in the morning. And the traction also stops when I wonder just what the hell I'm doing. This can't possibly work, right? With every podcast released, my numbers drop. The editors aren't emailing me back. My menu gets to be more and more creative as I run out of things to cook. But the book continues to come together, and that work feels important. It's a story that I think needs to find its way into the world. I believe in it, sometimes more than I believe in myself. I think sometimes the two of us just limp along together, taking a long journey through the desert until we reach the sea. And if I've done good work, my brain shuts down and it lets me sleep. That's the payoff I've been getting. And if I don't get it, I have to take antihistamines. and wake up too late, feeling like shit the next morning. And then I don't get as much done, and the whole thing just keeps building on itself until I go crazy or need to take a road trip with my dog to reset. Other than recording these podcasts tonight, I didn't get a lot of writing done. I kind of needed to take the day off. I wrote this script a few days ago, which sounds kind of odd because I'm saying something right now, and how could have I written it a few days ago if I am saying it now? Well, that's kind of a weird thing, isn't it? But today I took the day off. I went grocery shopping. I got out of town. The pass was nasty. It was just bad. Blizzard's coming in, and I knew that if I didn't get out of town to get some staples and things for dinners and whatnot, I wasn't going to get out of town for a couple of days. And as it was, when I hit the pass, the plows hadn't been out yet. And so I was following the ruts of trucks that had been left in the snow. And it was probably about 1.5 feet of snow, ice underneath. And I left early because I thought, if I get into Laramie quick enough, I can get a McDonald's sausage biscuit with egg if I get there before 10:30. I rolled into town at 10:34, and they had already shut down breakfast. And so that was kind of a bummer. And I thought, why did I just beat myself to pieces on this road trying to get there? But it was good, and I was able to get home before noon. Actually, it was a little bit after noon, but my whole day wasn't blown being on the road. It got me out of town, got some good groceries, and then I can cook meals for a few more days. And that is a little bit satisfying too. I was able to step away from the work, and then I was able to say, okay, got some more birds I have to take care of. Because bird by bird, that's a callback. Boom. But anyway, I think I've rambled enough on this one. If you like the show, let me know. I have fun doing them sometimes, and it's actually a lot more fun when I can just be kind of fast and loose and not think that it has to be perfect. And if you're listening, I really appreciate your listening. And I'll talk to you next time.